Welcome back to Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. We're pleased to welcome Victor Bernson, Vice President and General Counsel of Americans for Prosperity and former Director of Legal Affairs at the Pew Charitable Trusts. Victor, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here with you, Bill.
Victor, money and politics have always made a controversial mix. On the one hand, conservatives have been recently targeted by both the IRS and several states' attorneys general in what appears to be an effort to chill donations to groups out of favor with the ruling party. Yet, on the other hand, we have a candidate for president who's been running a multi-billion-dollar operation collecting donations from foreign governments and corporations who have business before the ruling party. You're fresh off a victory seeking to prevent the disclosure of charitable donor names to California Attorney General Kamala Harris. Before we get into that, give us a little bit about your background. You've been in public service for a long time.
I have, and thank you very much. Right now, I'm not in public service. I am with Americans for Prosperity, as you've already mentioned. I started out, after law school, I joined the Navy, and I spent a little over a decade as a Navy JAG. I was stationed overseas for about 6 years, was at the Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island for a year, and then was on an aircraft carrier for a few years. It was a fantastic experience. I would have stayed for an entire career, but I wanted to settle down with my kids. They were now becoming of school age, and I really wanted to have my kids enjoy an upbringing similar to mine. The second reason was my itch for politics. And, of course, while I was wearing our nation's uniform, I could not be engaged in active politics. So I made the really difficult choice after, a lot of conversations with my wife to get involved in the political world. And so I left the Navy in 1998. I started out with the Department of Justice and was there for about 3.5 years in the executive office for U.S. attorneys. And then subsequent to that, I started to really get involved in politics in my new adopted home in Maryland and in Washington, D.C. And that led to, some involvement with the George W. Bush campaign back in 2000. One thing led to another, and following the victory in 2001, I was there in front of presidential personnel being vetted for different jobs. Then 9/11 hit. I had just accepted a job to go with the Small Business Administration, and within 24 hours, I got a call from the Pentagon where the General Counsel's office said, "Hey, would you like to come in for an interview and possibly join us here?" And boom, I was all on board.
Wow.
I started in the Secretary of Defense's office working, with the General Counsel on special projects and such. I was there for about 3.5 years, and I got a call out of the blue from a person who said, "Hey, I'm from the White House, and, we have an opening for a General Counsel in our Office of Administration, and we'd be interested to know if you would like to come over and interview for it." I was like, yes,
okay.
Of course. That worked out. I got the job, so I spent the next 3.5 years at the White House. And it was just an incredible honor to go to work every day, just a fantastic learning opportunity as well. And then after, 2007, I did not ride it out to the end of the administration. I went over to private sector as general counsel for a big public relations firm in Washington, D.C. I spent a little more than 5 years there. And then, ended up, twists and turns go, at the large nonprofit, the Pew Charitable Trusts, for about 3 years. Great people over there, and again, just learned a ton. And then this amazing opportunity happened that brought me to Americans for Prosperity. I was aware of them and knew some of their good work, but I was a little bit dubious. And then I came over here, and it just, the experience I've had here, Bill, has just been off the charts. Of all those different great jobs I've had, this has far and away been the best one. The best people, the best mission, everything about it.
Well, let's get into the fight that you're conducting on their behalf. And I like to do that by rolling back the tape a little bit and looking at some of the incidents that have happened along the way. Not long ago, a prominent technology company CEO was forced to resign from the company he founded when it was revealed that he made a private donation to a group that was advocating against gay marriage. Remind us what that was all about.
Well, to the best of my knowledge, it was really about some very prominent folks on the left wanting to silence opposition to a viewpoint they didn't like. And the poor fellow at Mozilla was just a victim of this larger movement that very regrettably has been taking hold in the country. I've always been of the belief that, and Americans for Prosperity certainly shares this belief, that the answer to speech that we don't like is more speech. But that's not how it's always been viewed by the modern left. They believe that the answer to speech they don't like is to silence their opponents. And in this circumstance, what they did was search through public documents, found out that he had made a donation on the other side of an issue from which they were advocating for, and then they proceeded to harass and intimidate him by outing him, going out to the various customers and donors for Mozilla until he had to buckle, and ultimately he resigned. He was forced out by this intimidation campaign, and it was terrible.
What's the track record of groups like MoveOn.org, Code Pink, and various militant unions when it comes to actually picketing and harassing supporters of policies they disagree with?
It's very prominent. This is what they do. It's part of their modus operandi. And again, it's really unfortunate because in a civil society, we can agree that we oftentimes will disagree. And, we respect each other's viewpoints and we put them out there. But that's not really what, again, is the modus operandi of the modern left. What they've been doing is saying, look, if you don't agree with us, then your opinion is not valid in the first place. It's terrible, and terrible opinions have no right in the marketplace and must be silenced. And that's totally unacceptable.
What's the track record of attorneys generals, prosecutors, and government officials when it comes to leaking supposedly confidential information that ends up damaging groups or individuals they've targeted?
Not good. Over the course of time, for the most part, we didn't see too many problems with this in the first half of the 20th century. But as the years moved on, more and more often the modern left started to jump in and seize the opportunity to take confidential documents and expose them in such a way to embarrass certain groups with whom they disagree. That has meant that, a variety of organizations on the center right and a variety of individuals who have given to such causes, they have found their tax returns leaked, other confidential documents, interviews that were supposedly under seal, lots of things of that nature have been purposefully leaked in order to embarrass them and intimidate them into silence.
Not-for-profits have to file an annual 990 return with the IRS with a Schedule B that discloses donors of more than $5,000. What arguments do state governments make that they need to routinely collect that information?
The arguments that we heard from the California Attorney General, and we've heard similar arguments from the Attorney General in New York, are that they have a legitimate need for that information because they want to protect against fraud. And we went through an entire trial, 2 weeks of testimony with various witnesses on both sides talking about this. And in the end, the judge in our case, who I'd love to tell you about in some detail, he basically looked at all of that and said, the government's argument is patently absurd. They do not need that information in order to protect against fraud. They have plenty of other ways to do it, including if they have a reason to believe that some sort of nefarious activity is taking place, well, then they can issue a subpoena. They still have that authority.
Sure.
But a blanket right to just collect all of it and put it in boxes, or in the worst case scenario like we saw, take those forms and then start turning them into electronic documents and putting them on their website, and then, forgetting to mark as confidential the ones that are truly confidential, such that donors' names are published all over the place. And in our case in California, Bill, that happened over 1,700 times to 1,700 separate organizations. Their confidential donor information was leaked by the California Attorney General's office, and I truly don't think all of that was intentional, but it just went to show the degree of their incompetence in handling these confidential documents.
Over 40 years ago, the Supreme Court found a right to privacy in the Constitution that turned out to be pivotal in securing a woman's right to abortion. To what extent does this right to privacy extend to one's personal contributions to certified not-for-profit charities or advocacy groups?
That's a really interesting question. We hoped that the judge in the California case might jump on that particular principle as something that he would establish, and then, we could build on, perhaps all the way up through the Supreme Court of the United States. That right to privacy you mentioned, going back to Griswold v. Connecticut, well, it's been the law now for 50 years. So if there is a right to privacy, associated with certain medical records and abortion procedures and things of that nature, we certainly think there could be and should be a right to privacy relating to people's confidential tax returns, the donations that they make that are not intended to be public. Why on earth should everybody have a right to know what causes that each and every one of us gives to? That's just an invasion of our privacy, and we think that ought not to be so.
Okay, Victor, take us through the Americans for Prosperity Foundation versus Kamala Harris case. Start from the beginning. What do you think motivated California's Attorney General to come after you and your organization?
So who is Americans for Prosperity? Americans for Prosperity is the largest grassroots organization in the country on the center right, bar none. It's not even close. When I first came here, we had roughly 120 employees across the country. And today, we are looking at roughly 800 employees across the country in more than 100 separate offices. And every single day, we have our employees and our volunteers, which number in the many thousands, going out and spreading the great news of economic freedom and why it helps people to enjoy the fruits of freedom, experience the pursuit of happiness on their own terms. So this is how we go about it. We have these grassroots workers all around the country. We will tackle an issue, and when we turn on the juice, Bill, it's incredible. We will have, whether it's 500 people showing up wearing AFP T-shirts in a particular state house saying that expanding Obamacare into that state is a bad idea. And trust me, when 500 people show up like that, the local legislators, they stand up and take notice. Or, there is an important vote going on in a particular state, and we use all the resources at our disposal, including television and radio and such, but that's really not the strength. The real strength is person-to-person contact. So we unleash, our volunteers and our employees out in the field, and they go door to door, and they will speak to their fellow community members about, why this is a good policy or why it's a bad policy, and engage them on it, and then move on to the next household. In the meantime, we've also got the rest of the AFP community that isn't located in that particular state. If it's a big enough battle, we'll have people calling in from all over the country to people, in that state. Live calls, not robocalls, one at a time, taking a survey and explaining our view and asking them, where they stand. And again, if you're a state legislator in whatever state it might be, and you're hearing from 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 constituents about, this is a really bad idea, again, you stand up and take notice. And so we have been just logging victory after victory all around the country because of this tremendous grassroots army that we've built. And again, it's all about our effectiveness. And because of our great effectiveness, that's why we got on the radar screen of the Attorney General in California.
So after 10 years of operating in the state unmolested, you got under her skin.
Oh, yes, we did. Now, the thing is, the Attorney General in California is a very left-wing person. The Attorney Generals who are on the left, they all speak regularly. And there were many others in other states that, when they got together, clearly they were talking about AFP and how effective we were. And so she took it upon herself that, in her state, the climate is such that it's not going to cost her. California is so left right now, there's nothing to stop her. So she was going to go ahead and make a statement. She'll go after us and lead the way and, see how all this plays out.
So you sought an injunction to bar her from grabbing your records. Tell us about the judge you drew in the case.
This is fascinating. So the judge, his name is Manuel Real. He was appointed to the federal bench by Lyndon Baines Johnson in 1966. So Judge Real has been on the bench for exactly 50 years. He is obviously a very well-known judge in the Central District of California, which is the federal district courthouse in Los Angeles. He is not shy. He is a superb scholar in the law, and he is very opinionated. We all knew that going in. We braced ourselves for whatever challenge he might throw at us. And, I got to tell you, what we saw in there was really quite remarkable. He may be 92, but I'm just telling you, this man is as astute as any lawyer I've ever come across. He paid attention to every second of the trial. He was on top of every single thing that was happening in his courtroom. And he did show his temper on a number of occasions, but I got to tell you, they were all aimed, at the California Attorney General side because they were just not being as forthright as he expects and demands in his courtroom. So it was pretty lopsided by the time it was all said and done, and the judge then subsequently wrote a very tight, well-reasoned opinion. It was extraordinary. This judge is quite a man.
Well, he must have been around long enough to remember when donor disclosure was used as a political weapon in the old Jim Crow South.
I'm really glad you raised that point, Bill, because I think that's the key ticket here. This is not a Ronald Reagan appointee. This is not a George W. Bush appointee. As I mentioned before, this is an LBJ appointee. This is a man of the center-left, most likely. And in the end, he still had a very lopsided decision in our favor. Why is that? Well, precisely because of what you just raised. No doubt he was coming through his youth and college and law school in a time when race relations were at a very, very different state in our country. And the giant case of NAACP came to the Supreme Court for decision in 1958. And that was a seminal case. And the principles that were debated in that case are the same principles that we were dealing with in our case over 60 years later. It really boils down to, in that case, the Supreme Court recognized that the state of Alabama was demanding the membership list of the NAACP, not because they thought it would be really helpful to have a good idea of all the different membership lists of private organizations around the country. Everyone knew why they wanted that membership list. It wasn't to send them thank you notes. It was to harass and intimidate them to shut up. And the Supreme Court saw that, they knew it, and they voted 9-0 to prevent the state of Alabama from forcing the NAACP to turn over its membership list. The exact same principle was what we were looking at in California.
Well, this issue's been with us for over 60, 70 years. What I find strange and what a lot of young people miss is it was the Democratic Party who ruled the old Jim Crow South, and it's a Democratic Party who rules California. What is it about their technique?
I couldn't begin to tell you. All I can tell you now is that I'm really familiar with the Attorney General in California. I know that she is a hyper-liberal and she's running for U.S. Senate, and odds are she's likely to win. And that the modern left, I can't speak for the old one, but the modern left, well, they have a very clear idea of what they want to do when it comes to campaign finance and donors. They want, in the end, public funding of all elections. They believe that any money involved in any sort of election is just, by its very nature, corruption. There are some who are more cynical than that and have other reasons, but even the true believers, certain folks from the modern American Civil Liberties Union are taking the position that any money in an election is just, by its very nature, corruption. And that's crazy. If we don't have money in elections, because what does money get you? Well, there's two types of money. I'll be quick about this. There's basically giving money to a politician to specifically get your way. Well, that's called bribery, and that's unlawful everywhere.
I thought that was called constituent services.
No, it's just terrible. If I give a politician, $500 with a clear expectation that he is going to, do exactly what I want done, that's bribery, and that's not acceptable. Then there's a second type of money out there, and that is the money that is designed to allow a person's voice to be expanded. Because the means of getting someone's voice out there, like you and others, this stuff isn't free. It costs money to run a radio station. It costs money to get television time. All of these things cost money. So it's perfectly appropriate if you want to have your voice out there. In a real marketplace, you're going to have to spend some money. Well, that's where the left faces real problems here. Because by shutting down all money, what they would basically be doing is saying, the only ones who are allowed to magnify their voice are the politicians themselves. Well, that becomes entirely self-serving and would just be the ultimate Incumbency Protection Act.
Here's what I don't understand about this. Citizens United, of course, is the major bugaboo of the left and the people that you've been speaking about. And yet, money from the teachers union has to be some of the biggest money that flows into elections. How do those two things fit together?
You have me. I just don't see the connection at all. There are very few cases in our nation's history as misunderstood as Citizens United. So many people on the left treat this like this is the end of the universe, and that basically the Supreme Court opened it up so that corporations can just give unlimited money to anybody they want at any time without any sort of disclosure whatsoever. And basically everything I just said is totally false. It's nothing like that at all. All the Citizens United ruling did was allow companies to run their own endorsements of candidates in the run-up to an election. That's all it did. It had nothing to do with clean elections. It had nothing to do with anything else. It was just, hey, you can speak about candidates and you can say we support them or oppose them in the run-up to an election. Well, the teachers' unions, and every union for that matter, has been able to do that for years and years. And the whole concept behind Citizens United, as far as the court was concerned, was that when it comes to political speech, there is no speech in our country that should be more open than that. I mean, that is the essence of our democracy. We can't have government regulation of such things because the answer to speech we don't like is more speech. It's an open marketplace. And so, all of these predictions that the left threw out there about Citizens United and that it was just going to be the darkest day in democracy ever because corporations just be throwing money willy-nilly, none of that has come to pass. In fact, I think if you went back and looked politician by politician, you'd see that corporate America still probably gives a bit more to the left than they do to the right. Plain and simple. It's a total fallacy, and the way that these things are typically drawn up by the left is, okay, let's figure out where money comes in for our opponents, and let's try to stop that. And let's harass and intimidate those folks into stop giving. But let's make sure we always have a carve-out for those on the left. And then the folks on the left, well, they can spend and do whatever they want. And that's how a fair and free society should work. It's crazy.
It's a great gig if you can get it.
Exactly.
Well, Victor, it's been interesting to listen to the saga that you've shared with us. Congratulations on your victory. We'll see if it goes to appeal, and if it does, we'll be back to you.
There is probably a very good chance that we'll be back in this, but we're going to keep fighting. The big principle here is this. Donors must be able to give to causes they believe in without having to fear retaliation, intimidation, and harassment by the government. Amen. We know that California is going to appeal, and this fight will go on, but we really like our chances. And at Americans for Prosperity, we're ready and willing to keep fighting to protect our sacred First Amendment rights. Bill, thanks so much for allowing me to speak to you today.
Thanks for coming on the show. That was Victor Bernson, Vice President and General Counsel of Americans for Prosperity, here on Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. You can check out Real Clear Radio Hour on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at Real Clear Frezza. And while you're at it, take a look at realclearfuture.com for updates on the next big wave of technology. We'd like to thank our long-term sponsor, Old Boston Restorations, for their support. Old Boston is a Victorian property management company in Boston South End. Visit them online at oldbostonrestorations.com. That wraps up our show for this week. Please join us next week, same time, same station. See you then.